The courtroom was filled with murmurs and shifting seats. The air was heavy, tension thick with uncertainty. It had been a long day of cases, and the judge, who had grown weary of the constant back and forth, was ready to wrap things up. But what no one could have expected, especially the judge, was the woman standing before him. Her name was Tamara Johnson. Tall, proud, and poised, she walked into the courtroom with the kind of silent confidence that only comes from experience. It wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper. Something earned. Tamara's story was more than just a tale of justice. It was one of survival. It was the story of a black woman who had been underestimated her entire life, who had been judged not by the content of her character but by the color of her skin. But today, her story was about to unfold in front of an audience who would witness her power in the most unexpected of ways. The judge, an older man in his 60s with silver hair and glasses perched at the tip of his nose, was preparing to pass judgment. He'd seen cases like this before, cases where people tried to manipulate the system, where they thought their words could twist the law. And he'd seen the arrogance of those who didn't respect the court. So when Tamara stood before him ready to speak, he thought it was just another case of someone wasting his time. He looked down at his papers, glanced at her, and then chuckled to himself. "Ms. Johnson," he began, the sarcasm dripping from his words, "it seems like you're trying to argue something that's pretty clear to me. But you seem to think you have a card to play. What card is that?" Tamara stood motionless, her expression unwavering. She had heard the mockery in his voice. She had felt the weight of his eyes on her, sizing her up. But she knew better than to let that shake her. She had worked too hard to get here, and this moment wasn't going to define her. Not this time. "You'll see," Tamara said quietly, her voice carrying the kind of calm confidence that sent a ripple through the courtroom. She wasn't backing down. The judge raised an eyebrow. "Really? Well, let's hear it then. What do you have?" He gestured for her to speak. Tamara took a step forward, standing tall in her black suit. Her presence seemed to fill the room, but it was the energy behind her words that commanded attention. "I'm here to tell you that you don't know who I am, Judge," she said, her tone even but carrying a weight that could not be ignored. "I'm here to tell you that no matter what you think of me, you will respect me. You will understand who I am. And when this is all over, you will look at me in a different light." The courtroom fell silent. The judge, for the first time in a long while, was taken aback. But then, as if to reclaim his authority, he scoffed. "And who exactly are you, Ms. Johnson? You're just another woman in my court trying to play games. Do you really think you're special?" Tamara didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, one of those smiles that knew more than it let on. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small, unassuming badge. She held it in her hand, letting it dangle from her fingers. The judge's smile faded. His eyes narrowed as he tried to make sense of the badge. Tamara's hand slowly lifted, and she placed the badge on the stand in front of her. It was simple but unmistakable. The seal on the badge was clear: United States Secret Service. The room was so still you could hear the soft shuffle of papers. The judge stared at the badge for a moment, and his face slowly drained of color. He blinked twice, trying to process what he was seeing, and his voice trembled as he asked, What is this?" The entire courtroom had gone completely silent. The audience, the attorneys, even the court clerk, were all waiting for Tamara's next move. Tamara's gaze didn't waver. She knew what would come next. She had anticipated this moment for years. The world might judge her by her skin, by the weight of stereotypes that clung to her every step, but today in this moment she was about to show them all the truth of her worth. "I am Special Agent Tamara Johnson," she said, her voice filled with authority that could not be contested. "I serve as a member of the United States Secret Service. I'm not just any woman standing before you today. I have dedicated my life to protecting this country and its leaders, and I've done so in the face of adversity, prejudice, and doubt." The judge's mouth went dry, and he looked down at his papers as if hoping they would give him some sort of explanation. But there was none. Tamara wasn't just anyone. She wasn't some random black woman in his court. She was a force, a symbol of resilience and strength that the world didn't always recognize. "I've been fighting this battle my whole life, Judge," she continued, her voice steady and unwavering. "I've had to work twice as hard just to be seen, just to be acknowledged. But I've never let that stop me. And I'm here today to show you that I am not the joke you think I am. I'm not the stereotype you assume me to be. I'm not just a face to be overlooked. I am someone who deserves your respect." The judge sat frozen in place, unable to respond. The weight of her words sank in. He had seen her, judged her, dismissed her, but now here she was, standing before him with the power of truth in her hands. The audience in the courtroom began to stir. Some looked at each other in shock, others began to whisper among themselves. They had witnessed the judge's mockery, and now they were seeing something they didn't expect. They were witnessing a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and belittled, only to reveal that she was far more powerful than they could have ever imagined. Tamara stood tall, her head high, her presence undeniable. She wasn't looking for validation from anyone in that room. She didn't need it. She had fought for her place in this world and she had earned it. The judge finally found his voice, though it came out weak and unsure. "Ms. Johnson, I had no idea. I apologize for my words and actions. You've proven me wrong. I didn't understand who you were, but now I do." Tamara didn't offer him a smile or a nod of approval. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the apology in the way she knew how, with quiet dignity. "I accept your apology, Judge," she said softly. "But don't mistake my silence for submission. I am a force to be reckoned with, and I will continue to fight for what is right, no matter what anyone thinks." And with that, Tamara Johnson left the courtroom, not with a loud declaration, but with the knowledge that she had shown the world who she was. The world may have doubted her, but she knew her own worth, and that was something no one could ever take away. As she walked out, there was no turning back. Tamara knew she had made a statement. She had reminded the world that black women are not to be underestimated. They are not to be dismissed. They are forces in their own right, capable of breaking barriers and changing the world. The judge, sitting at his desk, could only watch as she left the room. The whispers in the courtroom grew louder, but this time they weren't about her. They were about him. They were about the realization that they had witnessed something powerful. They had witnessed a moment where prejudice was shattered, and a black woman stood proudly, unapologetically, taking her place in a world that too often tried to deny her. And though Tamara may have left the courtroom, her impact lingered long after. The door of the courtroom clicked softly as it swung shut behind Tamara, leaving an air of stillness in its wake. The echoes of her footsteps faded as she walked down the hallway, each step deliberate, each movement steady. But inside, her heart pounded with the rush of emotions that only someone who had experienced her life could understand. Tamara had been through it all. The sting of being underestimated, the weight of being treated as invisible, as though the world could not see her for who she truly was. It had always been that way. Growing up in a neighborhood where opportunities were scarce, where dreams were sometimes crushed under the weight of circumstance, she had learned early on that the world didn't always look at black women with the same respect it gave to others. But she wasn't the type to crumble under that pressure. Instead, she had fought back, quietly, fiercely, and with a resolve that no one could shake. She knew that if she wanted to make a difference, if she wanted to be seen, she had to prove herself in ways that went beyond what others expected. And she had. Time and time again. When she had first walked into that courtroom, all she saw were the eyes that already judged her. The judge had been no different. He had looked at her and assumed she was just another defendant. Just another woman who thought she could play the system. But today he had learned something he would never forget. Today she had made him see her for who she truly was. Not as a black woman trying to make her way in a world that often didn't want her there, but as a force to be reckoned with, a woman of power, of intellect, and of authority. Her mind wandered back to the moment when she revealed the badge, the moment when everything shifted. The stunned silence that followed was like a weight in the room, pressing down on everyone. She could see the judge's face, his confidence cracking as the reality of who she was settled in. She had been waiting for that moment, waiting for the chance to show the world what she was made of. But what she hadn't expected was the wave of relief that washed over her. The moment she revealed her badge, it was as if the weight of every injustice, every slight she had ever faced, lifted just a little. As Tamara turned the corner down the hall and approached the exit, she paused for a moment, letting the quiet of the empty corridor envelop her. She closed her eyes briefly, taking in a slow, deep breath. It felt surreal, like she had just finished the hardest battle of her life, and won. But even as she felt the rush of triumph, she knew that this moment was just one chapter in a much bigger story. This wasn't the end. There were still many more battles to fight, many more walls to break through. She had fought against the system, against the assumptions that people had made about her, but there was still more work to do. She had learned that life didn't just hand you opportunities. You had to take them. You had to earn them. And even then, the journey was never easy. It was full of setbacks, disappointments, and struggles that tested you to your very core. Her thoughts were interrupted when she felt her phone buzz in her pocket. She pulled it out, seeing that there was a text message from her partner, Andre. It was simple, yet it made her smile. "I'm proud of you, baby. I know today wasn't easy, but you've got this." Can't wait to see you tonight. Tamara's smile lingered. Andre had always been her rock. He had stood by her side through the hardest moments of her life, through the days when she felt like giving up, when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to carry. He had never once doubted her. He had seen her strength long before anyone else had. She quickly typed a reply, "Love you. I'll be home soon." As she reached the exit doors of the courthouse, the cool air outside hit her face, refreshing and grounding. She stepped into the sunlight, feeling the weight of the day fall away with each passing second. But there was something deeper stirring inside her, something she couldn't shake. The feeling that today had been important, not just for her but for every woman like her who had ever been dismissed, overlooked or underestimated. As she made her way to her car, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the window. For a moment she studied her face, tired but strong. Her eyes held a quiet fire, the kind of fire that had carried her through years of hardship, through doors that had been slammed in her face, through systems that hadn't been built for her to succeed. She had fought her way to the top and now she was in a place where she could finally make a difference. Not just for herself, but for the generations of black women who would come after her. Tamara slid into her car, the engine roaring to life as she drove off. She had a meeting later with her colleagues at the Secret Service, but her mind kept drifting back to the courtroom. To the way the judge had looked at her when she revealed who she was. He had been forced to see her in a different light, just as she had been forced to see him. As she merged onto the highway, she thought about her mother, about the woman who had raised her in a world that often didn't make room for women like them. Her mother had always told her, "The world will try to break you, Tamara. But you have to stand tall. You have to be unshakable. You are your own strength." Her mother's words rang in her ears as she thought about the journey ahead. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman who had ever been told she wasn't enough. She was fighting for every black woman who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, or silenced. She was fighting to create a world where they could stand tall, speak their truth, and be heard. As the miles passed, Tamara couldn't help but reflect on the many moments in her life that had led her to this point. The moments of hardship, the obstacles, the challenges that had seemed impossible at the time. But through it all she had kept going. She had kept fighting. Because she knew that nothing worth having came easy. When she finally arrived at her apartment, she parked the car and took a moment to sit in silence, collecting her thoughts. She could hear Andre's laughter from inside, and it filled her with warmth. He always knew how to make her smile even after the toughest days. She opened the door and there he was, sitting on the couch, a wide grin on his face. "How's my girl?" he asked, standing up to greet her. Tamara couldn't help but laugh as she walked into his arms. "I'm good," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'm more than good." He kissed the top of her head and smiled. "I'm proud of you. I knew you could do it." Tamara pulled back slightly to look him in the eye. "It's not just about today, Andre. It's about everything. Everything I've been through, everything I've worked for. It's about every woman who's been told she can't. I did it for all of us." He nodded, understanding the depth of what she meant. "I know," he said. "And that's why I love you." They sat together in the quiet of their living room, Tamara leaning her head on his shoulder, letting herself finally relax after the whirlwind of the day. But even in that moment of peace, she knew that her journey was far from over. Tomorrow she would wake up and she would continue fighting. Because for Tamara Johnson, there was no other choice. The fight for respect, for equality, for justice, it wasn't just something she could walk away from. It was something she had to carry with her, day in and day out for the rest of her life. But in her heart, she knew that the world was changing. Slowly but surely it was changing. And she would be a part of that change. Tamara Johnson was not just a woman in a courtroom. She was not just a black woman trying to make her mark in a world that had forgotten her. She was a force that no one, no matter how powerful, could ever ignore again. And in that truth, Tamara found her peace. As the night deepened and the quiet hum of the city outside her window settled into the background, Tamara sat on the couch, her thoughts swirling like the cool wind outside. The weight of the day still lingered, though the physical exhaustion that had settled in her body was slowly fading. Her mind was racing, replaying every moment of the courtroom drama, the judge's stunned silence, and the revelation of her true identity. But as much as she wanted to relax, her thoughts couldn't help but return to the bigger picture, the ramifications of what had just happened. What did it mean really? What impact would it have on her, on the people who had supported her, and, most importantly, on the generations of black women who were silently fighting the same battles every single day? The sting of the judge's initial dismissal, The laughter that had reverberated through the courtroom when he had presumed her to be just another defendant, was something that would stay with her. She knew that all too well, that feeling of being underestimated, ignored, and even ridiculed for simply existing as a black woman. But there was something about today that felt different. It wasn't just the shock in his eyes when she revealed her badge. It wasn't just the satisfaction of proving him wrong in the most public of ways. It was something deeper. It was the quiet realization that her fight wasn't only for her own recognition, but for every black woman who had ever been overlooked in this way. For every woman who had ever been doubted, dismissed, or treated as if she was invisible. For every woman who had ever been forced to prove her worth in a world that demanded more from her than it did from others. Tamara had always known that the path she was walking wasn't just hers to walk. She was carrying the hopes and dreams of those who came before her, and more importantly, she was lighting the way for those who would follow. Her phone buzzed again, breaking her from her thoughts. It was another text from Andre. "You okay? Need anything?" She smiled, her heart warmed by the constant support he offered. She had always known that Andre would be the one who would never let her down. He had been by her side through thick and thin, through the long nights when she doubted herself, through the moments when the weight of the world seemed too heavy to bear. He had always believed in her, even when others did not. He had seen her strength when no one else could. Tamara typed a response quickly, "I'm good. Just thinking. You know, the usual." A few moments later her phone pinged again. "I get it. Take your time. But remember, you're not alone in this. Not now, not ever." Her heart skipped a beat. It was exactly what she needed to hear at that moment. She put her phone down on the coffee table and leaned back on the couch, closing her eyes for a moment. She had so many emotions swirling within her, it was hard to process them all. But one thing was clear, today had been a victory. Not just a small win but a monumental shift in the narrative. She had proven herself, not just to the judge but to everyone who had ever doubted her. To every person who had ever assumed that a black woman couldn't hold power, couldn't wield authority, couldn't command respect. But her victory was not just personal, it was symbolic. Today she had become a beacon for all the women who had come before her. The unsung heroes. The black women who had worked behind the scenes, who had fought in silence, whose contributions had been overlooked or worse, erased. Today Tamara had given them a voice. She had shown that a black woman's worth was not determined by the color of her skin or the assumptions that people made about her. It was determined by her actions, her character, her resilience. She had cracked open the door and now it was time for others to walk through it. But despite her victory, there was still a fire within her, a fire that refused to go out. She had fought for this moment but there was still so much work to do. There were still so many people to educate, so many systems to dismantle, so many opportunities that had to be created for people who looked like her. Tamara knew she couldn't rest on her laurels. She had to keep pushing, keep fighting, and keep breaking down the walls that had been built to keep people like her out. As her mind wandered through these thoughts, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from her colleague at the U.S. Secret Service, Agent Carter. "I heard what happened today. You handled it like a pro. Proud to work alongside you." Tamara smiled, feeling a wave of gratitude wash over her. Agent Carter had been one of the few people who had always treated her with the respect she deserved from day one. While others doubted her ability to make it in such a high-stakes, traditionally male-dominated field, Carter had always believed in her. He had been there to support her, to push her to do her best, and to challenge her when she needed it. Her phone buzzed one more time. This time it was a news alert. Black woman in court reveals she's U.S. Secret Service agent after judge laughs at her. Watch the shocking moment. Tamara's breath caught in her throat. She clicked the link and watched the footage of the courtroom. The video had been uploaded minutes after the hearing had ended, and now millions of people were watching the moment that had stunned everyone. She saw herself again, the moment when the judge's laughter echoed through the room, and then the moment when she revealed her badge, her identity as a U.S. Secret Service agent. The comments were already rolling in. She just changed the game. This is why representation matters. She didn't just walk into that courtroom. She owned it. Tamara's heart swelled with a mix of pride and humility. It was one thing to fight for her place, to make her mark, but it was another thing entirely to know that her actions were having an impact. That people, women especially, were watching her and seeing that they too could be powerful. That they too could break down the barriers that had been set before them. The video was shared thousands of times. Headlines spread across social media, news outlets picked it up, and people from all over the world were commenting, applauding her courage and strength. She had become a symbol. A face of empowerment. She wasn't just representing herself. She was representing every black woman who had ever been dismissed, who had ever been told they couldn't, who had ever been made to feel small. But as she continued to read the comments, one thing became clear to her. This moment, this victory was just the beginning of something much bigger. It was the spark that would light a fire, one that would continue to grow and spread until it became a movement. Tamara knew this was her calling. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for every woman, every person who had ever been oppressed, who had ever been made to feel inferior. She was fighting for change. Her phone buzzed once more, but this time, it was a call from her mentor, Special Agent Darnell. He had been in the service for over 20 years, and his wisdom and experience had shaped Tamara into the agent she was today. Tamara, his voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable pride in it. I saw what happened today. You handled it like I knew you would. Tamara smiled, her voice steady but full of emotion. I didn't expect it to go like that, but I'm glad I could make an impact. It's not just about me anymore, Darnell. It's about all of us. We need to keep pushing. I couldn't agree more, he said. You've got the whole world watching now. Don't let up. Keep leading. Keep showing them what we're capable of. Tamara's resolve solidified in that moment. She wasn't just walking this path for herself. She was walking it for every person who had ever been told they didn't belong. She was walking it for every woman who had been dismissed, who had been doubted, who had been laughed at. She hung up the phone and looked out the window, the streetlights flickering in the distance. The road ahead was long, and it would be filled with challenges and obstacles, but she was ready. Ready to face whatever came her way. Because Tamara Johnson knew one thing for sure, she was just getting started.